Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Good evening.
For those of you on the web, you have no idea how many people are sitting here, but it's countless of generations that each of one carries here of souls and layers upon layers, right? They go back 3,320 years, to be exact, to the time when the Jews left Egypt, 3,320 years ago. So this will be the 3,320th Seder. Though we don't know exactly what kind of Seder they held the first year, but we do know they ate matzah. Maror they didn't need because they just had 210 years of Maror. Charosis I'm not sure about. We have to do a little research. Wine. Well, bottom line is that they were the originals. And since then we've been recreating the Passover experience year after year. And I've discussed at this class and the recent workshops online and offline and audio and video. I'm getting confused by the options. Many different aspects of it. So I wanted to address something new. Ein Beis Medrash B'lei Chiddush is the expression. There's no academy without some type of innovation. And above all, that which was said has been said, and we're always looking for something novel, something that will inspire us. Since Passover is such a rich and very diverse and a full-fledged menu of the Seder table, no pun intended, not just from a food point of view, but also the entire Haggadah, the Passover Seder, the 15 steps, the 10 items on the Seder plate, and all that goes in between, over and under. So there are many, many angles to address. So I wanted to address this evening the topic of, on a personal level, how to enter Passover. What mindset, what attitude, so to speak, we need to create an atmosphere that we can both benefit from the Passover experience. So you've heard from me in the past that Passover is the concept of transcendence. Some people have asked me what do I mean by transcendence. It's true, maybe it's somewhat of an esoteric word, but transcendence is just another word for what the way she put it was, freedom is just another word for nothing left to lose. So transcendence is just another word for the maybe most powerful human need and human yearning for relief of existential loneliness. Now some of you may say, what's existential loneliness and what's relief? I know the list goes, this can become a vicious cycle, so I'll explain it even on a more basic level. All of us as human beings do not have the luxury of being able to benefit from a life of animal bliss, which means an equilibrium of just simply no ups and downs, no mood changes, no depressions and no ecstasy. We are constantly in flux. Some of us more extreme than others. But basically, to be human means that there's constant change. Constant change. And constant mobility. Is that me? No, I don't think so.
No, I turned mine off. I didn't want it to go off.
Is that my sound or your sound?
That was yours.
I thought I was unique.
That's your
You mean you're also T-Mobile? I thought I was their only customer. They told me that it's only about me. Hey, dear Simon, So human beings by nature, and you could say this is inherent to us. This has nothing to do with our childhood experiences. You don't have to grow up in a dysfunctional home to be a person that's constantly in flux. Because to mean human, Velda, maybe you should close that thing because it's. To be human is to be constantly changing. So the analogy of the best way the imagery of animal bliss As I recall, many times when you go up to the mountains, the country, as a New Yorker, the first time you see a cow, you think it's some type of Disney creation, a real natural cow. So you're driving up to the country, and what do you see? You see these cows grazing in the meadows, in the fields, and driving. When I was a child, driving on the 17 up to summer camp or country, and you see the thing that always struck me was how peaceful they are, munching on the grass, and every year the same thing. Thinking back as in retrospect, I remember just it was like this consistent. You could rely that they were munching on the grass, walking around, languishing in these fields. You get a little older, and when you start realizing that, when you're young, you're not yet conscious of these things, but as you get a little older, you start thinking, do these cows suffer from anxiety? Are they ever bored? Do they go to therapy? And what do they do if they have a mother that abandoned them or something like that? And you come to learn and realize that animals function a different way than we do. They have what we call animal bliss. The best way to put it is the way the Alter Rebbe puts it in Tanya, that they have a sense of Lei Mishana Tafkidim, he puts it. A beautiful few words, he says. They never change they never waver from their function. They know what their function is, and they keep to that focus. And when we look now, these great nature shows that basically expose the inner world of almost every aspect of the universe in which we live, the animal kingdom, the vegetable and mineral worlds, you see that this is consistent. Each animal and each species has its own particular rules, but those that are living by those rules, it's like a clock. So whether it's the march of the penguins, or whether it's the way wasps feed and care for their young, they all have their own patterns. Some have different patterns. Some animals will eat their own children. Some will never. But in their own species, in the way they function, it's like a clock. You can predict exactly what they're going to do in every season. When they'll go to sleep, when they will mate, when they will care for their young, when they will hunt, and when they will die. Not necessarily exactly the moment, but essentially it is the fascination of it is that it's so precise. So in contrast, you look at us as human beings, we're everything but that. Perhaps there are human beings that live lives like clerks, where you know exactly where they are every second, and you can really they're very organized in that sense and always on time. But internally, human beings do go through different shifts and changes. So yes, so externally, some of us are more so-called consistent than others. So we have a whole different psyche, a whole different personality. And there's something about our human nature that, going back to transcendence, that requires and needs, yearns for things. We yearn for things. Animals live in the same habitats they did 500 years ago as they do today. Those cows grazing will be grazing in 500 years from now, unless humans destroy their fields. As they did 500 years ago. They're not looking for better homes. They're not looking for jacuzzis, for multiple dwellings and country homes. Of course, some animals do have two homes, where one in the winter, one in the summer, but that again is like the clock. And they don't have fax machines and cell phones and computers, and they are at peace. And some people actually crave for that. Some people, transcendence would be animal bliss. There was even an expression in the 60s that there was certain experimentation with certain drugs, psychedelic drugs, to try to induce a state of animal bliss. That was like almost an aspiration, that you can just be at peace with yourself. They called it bliss, to be in bliss. Anybody here is in bliss or has been in bliss recently? You know what the word means? I'm serious. Anybody here? Among the thousands of people sitting here in this audience, anybody here is in bliss? Okay. I guess that means no. Anybody anxious here? Just make sure that you're listening. You have to be, either if you're not, nobody anxious, no anxiety either. What is going on here tonight? Can we have some Jeff, come on, just
exhausted.
You have some
cleaning.
Okay, so I'll speak for myself. I have times I have anxiety, and sometimes less, and sometimes more. So I hope I'm a reflection of the human race.
What about the bliss part? You just talked about anxiety.
Once in a while, I don't know how long it lasts. But the point is that what defines human beings is that we do yearn for things, and we do have hopes, and we have dreams and aspirations. How about that? That everybody has? Finally found something. Okay. Anxiety not, bliss not,
Yes,
but aspirations.
anxiety,
Yes, anxiety? Okay, good. How could you have aspirations and not have anxiety? Because if your aspiration was fulfilled, then it wouldn't be an aspiration. So if you have an aspiration and you're not anxious to get there, or some angst, then something's missing, right? So, right, okay. So basically, we live in as human beings, and I said this is independent of what kind of home you grew up in, healthy or home, not so healthy. This is independent even of the hectic world in which we live, the fast-paced world. This is just a reality, a part of our nature. Now, when you add into the equation the complexities of our lives, our family relationships, our childhoods, our social pressures, general relationships, love, and so on, you can imagine that all this obviously gets amplified, and that we're always going through kinds of shifts and changes. Now, what does that do to us? So for some of us, we may escape in moments where we just do not want to address those aspirations or dreams because it's too difficult. Some people give up, for instance, to find a real love in their lives. Some people have given up, sadly. But what most of us do, as long as you remain some type of semblance of health and sanity, is that you yearn for these things. And you try to satisfy what we call the need for transcendence, meaning the need to break out of the existential traps that we live in whatever form it takes. Some of us do it in healthy ways, some do it in unhealthy ways. The root of all addiction, whether it's gambling, whether it's sexuality, whether it's drugs, whether it's alcohol, whether it's workaholic, whether it's religious addiction, the root of all addiction is the desperate need for relief. So the root of all addiction is the desperate need of a human being for some relief from life's pressures. Some relief, to put it more precisely, the formula, to balance between our yearning and aspirations and our reality. So you are here, you look for something, you're searching for something, and you want to relieve it. Nothing wrong to that point. But when you don't find relief, you will sometimes the desperation gets so powerful, so intense, so overpowering that you will do anything to relieve the pain. So maybe the thrill of a gamble, it may be the waiting for that next drink or joint, or it is other forms of passion or highs that we get connected to. So besides the physical addiction and dependency that certain substances have, physical, whether it's smoking or other substances, there is the psychological dependency, which is far, far worse. Because the physical, not that it's necessarily easy to break, but it's at least tangible. You can relate to it. The psychological, what do you do about it? If you're not going to fill the void, what's going to happen? So even if you can detox someone in rehab from a physical dependency, they go back home and they're still bored and there's a void in their lives. They may not go back to this, they'll go back to something else. So in other words, the soul is craving for something. So all this is just to explain that word transcendence that quite a few people have asked me what I meant. Not necessarily they didn't know, but they want to perhaps spell it out even further. And why is it so critical to this time of year? Because this is what Passover is. The word Passover is just another word for transcendence. When you pass over something, it's something, and then you pass over it. So though in the Torah specifically it's God passing over the doors of perception, but the truth is that what it's really referring to is a concept that's far beyond than just a physical passing over, is the idea of going out of boundaries, freeing yourself. Mitzrayim is boundaries, so it's not a surprise. Passover is passing over the boundaries, flying over them. In many ways you could say technology, for example, has created a boundaryless world. It's transcended time and space. Again, the word transcend. So for every form of transcendence, all fits under that one word Passover, and every form of of limitations, and that cause anxiety, and that we look for relief from, is a form of Mitzrayim. So Mitzrayim and Pesach essentially are antithetical, are the two poles, or the two opposites. Pesach being the antidote to the Mitzrayim, Yitzias Mitzrayim, to leave the limitations and the confines of our lives. This is the central theme of Pesach, and everything else follows from here. So I've discussed, as I said, this past week and last week at the JCC and other workshops I've done online and audio, so on, the different methods, the different ways, the different tools we use, which include the 15 steps of the Seder. Those of you not familiar with them, I'm not going to go over it right now because I did it last week. It's now online. If you go to meaningfullife.com, you have a video of it, you have an audio version of it, you have a type version, you have all the methods. Whether you like text, or you like to watch things, or you like to listen to things, we have all your senses covered. Okay? Smell has not yet been devised, so but you can create an artificial smell. Let's say if you like the smell of coffee, brew yourself a little coffee. What else is missing? Touch. Oh, okay, touch. So maybe these things will touch your heart, but if you need physical touch, that I can't provide yet. Meaningful Life Center has not yet figured out a way. Rucham will give you the challenge to figure out how to create smell and touch through the cyberspace. Maybe that will never be created because God does want us to have real mothers that cradle us and not give us a computer program to nurture us. So maybe that will not.
Moving into KOIP, so that's not exactly correct.
Okay, well, I don't want to see a world like that where mothers become unnecessary. Okay.
What's KOIP?
It's a secret thing only for those that know it's going to be.
You know what DOIP is?
Yeah.
All right. Well, KOIP is Next Generation Artificial Intelligence. It's knowledge over.
That's all you can say for the moment, right?
Yes.
The rest is proprietary. Trade secrets. Anyway, so we'll go back to 3,320 years ago, a world long before technology understood the power of transcendence. And it's interesting that I think they achieved quite a few things in those days without VOIP and without KOIP and without LOIP. You don't know what that is, right? You heard it here first. I'll develop it. I don't know yet myself what it means, but and then there's always XOIP. If you add an X into something, it's always like, that's like X cola.
LMNOP. Got that one.
You're reverting back to that's regression.
That's right.
LMNOP. Okay. So back to 3 millennia ago, we had no technology, but we had a Moses, who probably is more powerful than all the technology in the world, and his words still resonate till this very day. And we transcended. We left this godforsaken place called Mitzrayim. And as the Maral of Prague writes, powerful statement that this was not a redemption or freedom that was just physical, it was psychological, it was emotional, it was spiritual. The door of freedom opened up 33,320 years ago. This Saturday night will be exactly the anniversary. A door opened up that would never close. And the words of the Bible, the immortal words of the Bible, where Hashem, God said to the people, Avodai Atam, you are my servants. V'lo avodim la'avodim. You are not servants to my servants. Think about that when you enter into Pesach. You're my God servants. You're not servants to my servants. In other words, we're not subservient to other subservients, which are God's creatures. We are all equal in the eyes of God. That is a message all the time. It's the message of the Declaration of Independence. But Pesach night, of all nights, Manishtana, it's pronounced because that's when it actually gave birth. So you could say, well, when God created Adam and Eve, He said He created them B'Tselem Elokim, in divine image, and they were already free. So Hasidic thought explains that though in the beginning of creation is true, Adam and Eve and the first men and women were created potentially, they were divine image, but the fact is they were still enslaved to their own passions, to their own distortions, and you see they destroyed themselves. It took 26 generations, which is 26 generations from Adam and Eve, for Moses to take the Jews out of Egypt and then ultimately lead them to Sinai. So there was a dimension of freedom that was achieved that even Adam and Eve didn't have. Because what Adam and Eve were given was a gift from heaven. What the Jews had when they marched out of Egypt, that momentous afternoon, the 15th of Nisan, was that they had paid the price for it. It's a big difference. When you get it from above, it's a gift. And as Kabbalah especially, and Hasidic in particular, explains, that gifts from above are great, but they're not earned. And since they're not earned, they're not yours yet. You don't own them yet. So all the efforts that were done in the first so-called 26 generations were really gifts from above. Though Abraham and Isaac and Jacob paid prices, but they were blessed. They were born with certain features, and they had certain gifts that were given to them. What happened when the Jews left Egypt, as the Maral says, the door of freedom opened, that now in the consciousness of mortal human beings like ourselves, we earn the right to be able to be free. So it's not just a gift, it's now something that is now accessible to all of us, to achieve true transcendence. So there's a key difference between the two, and now history would change forever. To have, for example, today a country like the United States, and I'm not talking about the flaws of this country, which are plenty, but the basic principle that allows us to sit here and just talk Torah without the fear that our parents and grandparents had 60 years ago, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, is built on a principle that divinely inspired the founding fathers, that all people are created equal, and as such have a right to choose freely their religion, their practice, how they want to worship, not worship. It even goes to the extent that you can choose not to believe, not to practice. But that fundamental right that a human institution called a government and a political system, which we all know is not driven by necessary divine goals, is driven by selfish gain. It may even be driven by, obviously, there's a give and take, which means that any intelligent system would understand that that if you want to coexist with others, and if you and there's no law and order, we'll all destroy each other. But it's interesting, until the revolutions in the 17th, 18th century, that was not common. There was no government. I mean, in the early Greece, and there were certain principles that defined by Plato and by Aristotle that defined. But the fact is, governments were ruled by monarchs. Governments were ruled by the church at some point. It was ruled by a few people who thought they were closer to God, or they were chosen, and they understood better than the public does. So this experiment that we call democracy is a very relatively new one. To us it may all resonate, like it would seem like natural that people should have always understood this. But it wasn't that way. The Jewish people came to understand it when they left Egypt, and especially when they received the Torah, because that's when it was formalized. So though at the beginning of creation human beings were created in the divine image, but for it to manifest as a system that you can live by, so for the Jewish people it happened 3,320 years ago, and interestingly for the world it just happened 200-300 years ago. Just to show you that it takes time for things to manifest in existence. It's just an interesting study. So when they asked Zhou Enlai, who was the Chinese prime minister, when Nixon went to visit there in 1972, and China opened up. So China, of course, has an ancient civilization with their own belief systems and so on. So one of the reporters asked him, it was the first time an opportunity to talk to the Chinese, I asked him, so what does he think about the French and American revolutions? So he said, it's too early to tell. Too early to tell. Which is a certain wisdom, too early to tell. It's only 200-300 years. We're talking about thousands of years of history. So it's interesting just to put in context the power of the freedom of Egypt, of Mitzrayim, was something that took 26 generations for the universe to experience. Once the door opened, it would never close again. So first, it's true the Jewish people experienced it, but the mission is to be a light unto nations, and that this should become a reality for the entire world. Is it a reality today? It's far, a lot of progress from where it was once. I'm not talking about individually. There's plenty of discrimination, we know that. There's plenty of things that we don't necessarily follow. But the fact is that on an institutional level, on a governmental level, you can prosecute if you're discriminated against. This was never possible. Again, I'm not getting into the corruption of the courts and whether you win or not. We all know there's plenty of problems in the system of the law, the justice system. But I'm talking about the fact remains that we are sitting here and we do not have to be afraid of the KGB or secret police, or God forbid the Nazis, etc., or before that the Inquisition and so on. So so progress has been made, and the energy of freedom that the morale defines, that opened up, the door that opened up 3,320 years ago, is very much part of human existence today. And it definitely is, even people who may not always follow it because of their own selfish or narcissistic reasons, but what is considered to be popular today, what is common, so to speak, common menschlichkeit, common decency, is that yes, every human being has a dignity to choose. And even people who want to take it away from us, they're not going to come out publicly and just say they're ready to. They'll hide it in some type, mask it, because today the standard is now that. And so it's critical to understand this. So to go back to Passover and therefore understand its centrality, as you see, this is far more than just a Jewish holiday. It's actually a representation of an entire philosophy that is not just a philosophy pie in the sky. It's a reality now, as I said, on a political, governmental, and practical level. But of course, the biggest challenge, and this is what I want to address, is: are we truly free? This is institutional freedom, a governmental level. What about our psychological freedom? What did Passover do to that? Many people will say, with all this prosperity that we have, with all this so-called freedom, many people would say it may have been easier actually to live under a monarch, because he was making the choices for you. And in some ways, psychologically, people may have been more at peace then. I don't know, animal bliss, that I discussed earlier, but definitely less options. And this was the argument, by the way, of the elite. Even the elite of the Enlightenment that challenged so-called the hierarchy of the monarchs in the church, they too argued, especially the French Enlightenment, the elitism, that there will always be people who understand better than others what's right for the masses. And the masses, as we all know the poem, the rhyme, the masses are whatever they are. The French called them the canal, I think, which was like the dirt. And they will always need religion or other, as they put it, inferior forces to keep them in line. Even in this great country of the United States, what is the electoral college? We all know from high school what the electoral college is. Whether it works or doesn't, I don't really know. I never figured it out. But basically, the argument was when they founded this country that the masses are simply too busy or too stupid. I don't know if they used the word, they used too busy instead of saying too stupid, too overwhelmed by the daily struggle for survival to really choose leaders. You need some intelligence to even choose a leader. So you need leaders to choose leaders, basically. But of course, that went against the whole idea of a country of the people, by the people, for the people, of free elections. Because then it'll give you back to, instead of one monarch, you have 20 monarchs. So they created this thing called the Electoral College. What's the Electoral College? That every state would have representation, let's say in New York, for every million people, like this House of Representatives, something like that. For every million people, one elector, who would be so-called the wise one. So when you're actually voting for, let's say, since we're not endorsing any candidates, for Mickey Mouse, who gets more votes than many. So if you're voting for Mickey Mouse, you're really not voting for Mickey Mouse. You're voting for the elector who vouches and promises, like the delegates, that he will vote for, or he or she will vote for Mickey Mouse. Now, what is that? But then the question is, which I never figured out. I graduated high school by that point. That what happens if he decides not to do what you decided, which is the whole point. What do you need him for? This is just if he's voting what you're voting for, then what are we back to square one? So I don't know. So I guess it's some type of checks and balances that in case the masses of the United States decide to vote for Mickey Mouse, actually, too many will do that. I guess the electors will overrule them. I don't know. Does everybody?
If they consider that it's a truly dangerous person that they're voting for, that would overthrow the whole system.
So technically, the popular vote may not even elect the president.
Right.
But I don't think anyone would tolerate that. They would fire the electors. Anyway, but officially this was supposed to address the issue of some type of in-between solution where you have elections, but the people can't really always choose. So you have these so-called in-between people who control safeguard. Okay, I don't know. As I said, if it works, if it's possible to work, it doesn't matter. But this is just to show you that even in the progressive United States, where there's
No, it doesn't work.
Okay. No, you have. That's why you have, for example, the situation where when a president may have won the popular vote, but he lost the electorate college. You have a few like that. The point I wanted to simply make was that even in the United States, with democracy, there still remains that problem. Judaism addresses it. I don't want to really go into it here, but suffice it to say that the Passover experience, which opened up that door of freedom for all, which means really the dignity of all of us created in the divine image. We also at the Seder, we welcome everybody. Heilach ma'anya. And we say that everybody's welcome. Kol dechvin. Everybody's
It's only the family. Where in other situations you can recur of chesed. With this one you can't.
But that's already the politics of it. In a true Jewish home that follows it would open the door for everybody, not just for the family. Yeah, and
Elijah.
I've been in homes like that, so I'm talking from experience. Not all homes, that's true. Some people love only those that like that. They love only people that they're like themselves. But that's another discussion whether people implement it. But the Passover Seder is meant to be one where there's a total equality, and all 4 children are equal. You say Echad Tzaddik and Echad Rasha and Echad Tam and Echad Shein Ein Yodea Lishol. And not the Tzaddik, you don't see the Tzaddik is lifted up on a pedestal better than the others. All are addressed. They have different roles. They play different roles, but they're all addressed. Keneged Arba Banim Dibra Torah. It says the Torah speaks to all 4. So there are many, and I'm talking again. I'm not talking about how this is manifests in existing Jewish establishment. As you all know, my opinion about that. We're talking about the way it's meant to be. So Passover is a powerful unifying experience in that sense, and above all, the freedom, the dignity, and the freedom of being created in the divine image, which manifested in a real way, as opposed to the way it was in the beginning of creation. But as I said, you can make the argument with all our so-called political freedoms and religious freedoms, are we freer people? There are those that argue, and especially Jewish scholars, not that necessarily they're suggesting to turn the clock back, but some come close to that as well. Obviously I don't agree with that, as you'll see in a moment, that in a strange way, when we Jewish people were oppressed, whether it was in the world of the shtetl, or the world of the ghetto, or whatever oppression, whatever form it took. So besides all the curses of oppression, the death, the physical oppression, the taxation, the discrimination, the insecurity, the unpredictability of what would be tomorrow, but as far as internal Jewish life was concerned, right? It was very healthy, and it was very functional. It was very freeing. And some would say that external prosperity give people outer freedoms, and their inner freedoms become very confused. And you can make the argument simple. If you have your freedom consists of what channel you're going to watch tonight of the 5,000 channels on your cable network, and then if that bores you, you also have the internet where there's another 5 million channels, or 50 million, or 500 million, or 5 billion, whatever it is. And in case even that doesn't work, you could always type into Google whatever comes into your mind, and I'm sure you get a bunch of new options. So it's endless, which all this sounds like great freedom, because you can access everything, anywhere, anytime. Yet, basically, it all is a great distraction from focusing on yourself. It's an excellent escape. Just another addiction. And it's already been identified, internet addiction. It's another addiction, another escape. The overabundance of access to knowledge, and therefore not being in touch with normal relationships. The hours that you spend there means that you're not spending those hours with people that love you and you love them. Simple as that. It's true you could be probably online with someone you love, but you're also going to be online with someone that you shouldn't be loving. Let's put it that way. So a lot of options. The options are open. And in a simple world, especially for Jews who were living in a shtetl, let's say, they couldn't even go to the big city. They wouldn't have been accepted. They couldn't mingle. They couldn't assimilate. So they had to build inner lives. Their lives were Torah, mitzvahs, a Seder, family, Shabbos. That was their life, spiritual life. And it thrived. Yes, you could argue it thrived because they were naive and they were closed off and they didn't have other options. I'm not disagreeing with that, but to use to play that argument, which some have argued, which is really the basis of some of the so-called ultra-Orthodox Jewish approach, is that we want a world like that again. So let's build a Monroe or a Kiryat Joel or a New Square or others, cities, where we recreate that pure world that our grandparents had, and with least amount of exposure to so-called outside influences. The argument obviously against that is not that there's not something fundamentally wrong with trying to do that, is that we don't live in a world that's possible to do that. Because today the boundaries, those people are, if you're not using telephones, and you're not mingling in business with anyone, and you're just sitting on a farm and like an agrarian culture and society, okay, if you go all the way that way, you can make an argument for that. But you're basically using all the modern benefits of the world, except you don't want to be influenced by it. You are influenced by it if you're making money off of it. That's the problem. And then, of course, it's on a bigger level, it's a divine question. Who really created the world of so much progress? Who planted into the universe technology? It wasn't some secular scientist that did that. That was God. If God had not created electricity and subatomic particles and cellular structures and the whole inner workings of the universe, we wouldn't have this access to all this stuff. So of course it creates all kinds of new challenges. No one takes that away. But to go back to the big question that's asked to Rabbi Akiva in the Mishnah, where the philosopher, the Roman philosopher, asks him and says to him, if God doesn't want to have idol worshippers, worshipping the sun worshippers and moon worshippers, why doesn't he destroy the sun and the moon? And Rabbi Akiva, of course, wisely answers, V'chi mepnei hashetim ya'abed Hashem eselameh. Because of the fools, God's going to destroy his own universe. Because there are fools who are worshipping the sun and the moon, God's going to destroy the sun and the moon. So the Tosfos Yontif, a classical commentator on the Mishnah there, says, as the question, why didn't the philosopher follow up with the next question? Why doesn't he destroy the fools? Not the sun and the moon, so destroy the fools. Or maybe the better way, shouldn't allow people to be fools in the first place. And of course the answer is free will. Free will. The whole purpose of existence is that we are partners with God in the picture. In a sense, God the partner provides the resources, but we have to plant the seeds, and we have to harvest the land. And then we like the same philosopher, maybe not the same, but a similar one asked Rabbi Akiva, if God wanted you to circumcise your 8-day-olds, why didn't he create them circumcised? So Rabbi Akiva answered on that one as well. He says, if God wanted bread, give us bread. Why didn't he put bread on our tables? Instead, he gave us the ability to plant grain, seeds, and that grain is we have to water it and care for the fields, and then we harvest, and then the grain has to be crushed into flour, and the flour has to be mixed with water, and then you have to bake it, whether it's matzah, challah, it doesn't matter in this context. So in other words, there's a partnership here, and every partner can be a fool, can choose to be one. So essentially the same as with technology. Technology is neutral. We can use it either way. And God's not going to destroy his universe because there's some fools who don't use it right. But the question still looms, and still demands an answer. How do we today, Passover, experience true freedom internally, even though we may have all the external freedoms? And as I said, this argument is definitely a powerful one, that the more prosperity, the less free we really are internally. The more options doesn't necessarily mean you become freer, you become more enslaved. And a very strong argument could be that in direct proportion to human prosperity comes human anxiety and dysfunctionality and selfishness. Give people more money and more power, what happens? They become more refined? They become spiritually and emotionally healthier people? I'd like to see, so it's almost impossible to even imagine that way. Because they get consumed and corrupted by that power and by that money. And look at families. What's the statistics of families of a father who's earned enormous amounts of money, amassed great amounts of wealth? Look at statistics. How long will it last? How many generations? 1, 2, without battles and without a family being torn apart. So what does that say? Again, I'm not suggesting the Torah sees prosperity and wealth as a blessing, but it doesn't mean there isn't a challenge. It's a great challenge. And there are people who I've met who made serious money, talking about big money, and they in many ways regret the money they made because it destroyed their family, and they don't have children talking to each other and grandchildren talking to each other. As one man once told me, what do I need all that money if I don't have my children coming to my house to speak? The whole reason I made the money was for them. But they didn't earn it. And when you don't earn it, we all know what happens. So the corruption of power and money for an individual who earned it, they say it corrupts everybody. But you could dare at least say, at least the person earned it. There's a certain, certain element of refinement that comes with that. But when you talk about someone who hasn't earned it and behaves as if they've earned it, then you know the arrogance of that, the illusion of that, creates the worst obnoxiousness possible. So this is a dilemma, and what I want to address in this context is what, besides what I talked about earlier, that Passover opened up the door for liberty and collective freedom, what it talks about is personal freedom, because today that's the challenge. Today we don't have to go ahead now. Our job is not to go change governments. That has happened, thank God, and it's continued to progress. But what does it mean on a personal level? So in this interesting way, when our grandparents sat at the Seder, they probably were asking the Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim that God should send us a world where we can send our children to Jewish schools and no one should kill us for that. And we have that, and our question is, how do we Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim? How can we create freedom that the children that we have choice to send wherever we want should grow up with internally, psychologically free and emotionally healthy? That's today. Our Yetzias Mitzrayim is a completely opposite one that it once was. Which is interesting, the twist of events. I don't think our grandparents would ever have imagined it this way. They would have seen a world like ours, like the world of Mashiach. They would have assumed the spiritual integrity would have remained intact. Why would that be compromised? So the only thing missing is that the world is not ready yet. The nations of the world have not given us those freedoms. Little do they know that as soon as the nations of the world would give us those freedoms, that whole spirituality that was always so strong internally would be so compromised. Very bizarre twist of irony, if you ask me. So, but this is our challenge, to spell it out. So here we have to dig into something deep and profound. And I want to use the collective just as an example. What was it, let's be honest, what is it about the Founding Fathers that was different than all the leaders before them? When George Washington refused to be king, be called king. When the Founding Fathers, who had power, why did they not get corrupt and call themselves, instead of one King George, 10 King Georges, and they had the ability to, they wrote the rules and they wrote the laws. What was it James Madison, and Jefferson, and Franklin, and the others that were so vital? Were they some type of bigger tzaddikim? We know that they had plenty of their own inconsistencies in their own lives, personal lives, and of course, many of them had slaves. And nevertheless, what was it? What was unique about what they understood that people before them did not? And they were ready to create a country. Again, I'm not suggesting the country is perfect, but at least on paper, they did something that was not done before. It simply was not. Aristotle didn't achieve it. Neither did any of the most enlightened thinkers and philosophers. And many of them, there were philosophers through the generations that had their heads straight on and understood that the basic freedoms of a human being. But it never became reality. Either because once they got into power, they became corrupt and they decided, okay, now I'm here. In a way like what happened with communism. Communism, which so much based on Marxist thinking that all people are equal. That was the whole basis. That there shouldn't be any financial differences between economic scale. Yet, nevertheless, the biggest abuse of individual power was by the communists. Because once they came in control of so-called being the apatrufus, the caretaker of the property until it becomes all non-privatized, they became more corrupt than anyone. Stalin as a case in point. Just the worst abuse of it. So, the answer is something maybe they knew, maybe they didn't know, the Founding Fathers, but I think the answer is a Pesach answer. They had bittul. They had bittul. Bittul is the word, is maybe the secret word, the most powerful word of all, that ultimately creates real freedom and allows a person to transcend themselves. What is bittul? Bittul in Hebrew means, we use it actually Pesach in the laws of halacha. In the laws of halacha, bittul is bittul of chametz. You mevatel the chametz, you abolish the chametz. So usually if you speak about the word bittul in a pure Hebrew word, it doesn't necessarily have positive connotations. It means to abolish, to destroy, to erase, to be mevatel something. But if you study Kabbalah and Chassidus, bittul takes on a whole other dimension. The word bittul is not about annihilation, it's about suspension of self. So when we're vatel chametz, that expression, or mevayer chametz, we're not talking about annihilation, we're talking about suspending something in order to allow something greater to enter into our lives. It's a secret to every type of growth. And in some way, collectively, maybe they were blessed, the founding fathers had it. Maybe it was the final oppression of England, and what they saw was experienced in Europe, the religious the persecutions of religion, or the battles between the Catholics and the Protestants, or was what finally broke their back was the English demand, King George's demands, as they talk about in the Declaration of Independence, and essentially it created some type of a refinement, and they actually saw themselves as compared to the Jewish people leaving Egypt. In the writings of Madison and some of the other founding fathers, they see their coming to America as the exodus from Egypt, and they call America the new promised land. All these, even the church, when you talk about the king, the castle on the hill, is that the expression in his great speech? That was it the castle on the hill?
The shining city on the hill.
The shining city on the hill. Well, or images from the Bible. And Hebrew was the first considered official language for America. Did you know that? They were considering it to be Hebrew, because they saw themselves as the new Hebrews. And this wasn't necessarily based on any type of anti-Semitism. They saw themselves as the new Hebrews. And they were very biblically steeped into biblical thought. And all the models of the beginning of this country is very modeled of what happened at Passover. Many ways.
I mean, why the change? They were draining cups for thousands of years, these maniacs, and what quote-unquote religious thought.
I'm going to answer.
In the middle of nowhere.
I'm going to answer that. I'll get to that. I asked that question myself, so I will answer. But the point I want to make is, before I get there, is that ultimately it took a collective or a group form of bittul for them to create something that would transcend even their own power. And it's interesting that even though they were slave owners, and the same people wrote into the Declaration of Independence, all men are created equal. Well, people are created equal is the way we would say it. So how did they see that exactly? So of course you could argue that they looked at blacks, or they called them then by a different name, as being not people, not men. But the fact is, because they wrote that in the Declaration of Independence, in a sense they built in the power that ultimately would abolish slavery. So these great slave owners themselves were able to write, and they were not stupid. They probably, I don't know if they understood it as such. Meanwhile, they took advantage of, I guess, the climate was that the slavery was allowed, but they built it in. They built in that it would ultimately abolish slavery based on the same declaration that these men wrote. So there was a collective bittul that took place that was very similar to the bittul that took place when the Jews left Egypt. I would say, obviously, God's hand is always a factor. Why it didn't happen earlier is definitely part of the bigger plan. But I think even on a historical level, what I think is the way that the Kabbalists would put it, you all know the concept of, or maybe you don't, I'll explain it here, the concept of shviras hakelim, the breaking of the vessels. That there comes a point when the light is too intense and the containers can't contain them, there'll be a breaking of the vessels. So I've always explained it as being somewhat of a market correction, like a reality check. That in the cosmic order, once the divine was concealed from reality, at some point that could not hold. Because when the purpose of existence is concealed from existence, at some point it's going to explode. So shviras hakelim is a way, that market correction that corrects and says something is wrong in this order. It's like you'll see any form of upheaval, even on a health level. If your body begins to crack, God forbid, it's telling you something. If something has come to a point of a break point, and it's a warning. So breaks are not always a sign of something negative. A break could actually be the sign of something positive, on being unable, uncontainable. When you burst out, when comes a point where you can't tolerate anymore. So yes, on one hand, no one should ever have to come to a point like that, but that's a healthy thing, because there's something in your system saying you've come to the boiling point, and a red light is going on. The fact of the matter is, after the oppression of how many years of church and monarchs, and basically a pagan view of the universe, and it was only the Jews that carried the banner of freedom. Only the Jews always stood up and said that all people are created equal, and including non-Jews. Because in Pirkei Avos that says, Chaviv Adam Shenivra B'Tzelem, that beloved is the human being that was created in the image of God, which was referring to non-Jews. Because afterwards it says, Chaviv in Yisrael, that received the Torah and so on. That Mishnah goes back thousands of years. That's not a Mishnah that's written in the 21st century, because we live now in a world where the non-Jews are kind to us. That's a Mishnah written thousands of years ago. In the time of, you know when? The worst times of all. The destruction of the Second Temple by the Romans. How could the same compilers, the Tanoim, say, Chaviv Adam Shenivra B'Tzelem? They looked around, they saw animals, they saw Hitlers, they saw Nazis, the equivalent of those times, massacring, defiling, desecrating God, the temple. So, and yet Chaviv Adam Shenivra B'Tzelem, because the Jews always knew that just because the people were behaving like animals doesn't mean that God didn't create them in the divine image. They were just defiling their own image, basically. So it wasn't driven by whether we're comfortable with it or not. It's driven ultimately by God decides these things. And there's nothing sadder than when someone created in the divine image destroys others created in the divine image, obviously. But Jews always had the hope that one day the world would come to understand it. And then ultimately the abuse. Simple as that. Like it is today, I find that we live in a generation where we're entering now the second and third generation of dysfunctionality as a result of prosperity. And in a strange way, I have no doubt that it's going to reverse the tide. Because there comes a point, there's enough children going to therapy and to 12-step programs that's saying enough is enough, and when there's a certain type of critical mass of misery, it's usually going to have a powerful revolutionary effect, which we can't even predict what it's going to do. Because it's beneath the surface. No, there are no statistics for these things. You only have statistics of people who are ready to share their lives. People who are usually in that place are not really going and voting in polls. They're busy trying to struggle to deal with alcoholic parents, abuse of all forms. They're not really taking phone calls. How's your what's your state of mind today? Type of thing. I mean, but I believe that was a point because people inside inherently want to have healthy families, want love in their lives, and where there's so much lovelessness, in a strange way, it hits the rock bottom. Is going to have to be an upturn, simply based on the human spirit. Now, those who have a more pessimistic view is usually based because they don't believe in the human spirit. But if you believe in the human spirit and the dignity of the divine image in which we were all created, Passover will come for our world in a very interesting way, I think, in the next generation. It means that I don't mean 100 years from now. I'm talking about the next 10, 20, 30 years, because of simply the collective pain that exists, and a pain that's very hard to gauge. Television, it's not popular for television programs to gauge this pain. They are more or less providing some type of comic relief or superficial relief of the existential pain that exists. But internally, people want this. And I think that the Founding Fathers, when that point, which was very much the same question could be asked, why the Renaissance, which led to the Enlightenment, which led to democracy, which led to a freer world in which we live, I believe it's some type of Shvirat HaKelim, that ultimately there was a collective breaking of the containers of the monarchs of Europe and Russia and all over the world that ultimately gave in. It had to break. The abuse of the church, meaning by church leaders, and I say this even with the Pope being in America today, so you can quote me.
Okay. There are problems, you have to recognize their humanity.
Yeah. So when you take all that into account, there came a point, and I believe that was the point, the watershed moment, when the Founding Fathers ultimately created, and it was ultimately a bittul that came from a lot of pain. Because sometimes bittul comes from our self-imposed bittul, which I'm going to discuss, and sometimes it comes from just the collective pain of just so much happening that something has to give. And it was in those times, you want to look at the Zohar says that in the year Tafresh in Hebrew would be 5,600, equivalent would be 1840. There will be a new revolution of knowledge as a foretaste of Messianic time, but also as a counter to the darkness. When dark gets too dark, some new light has to emerge. That's the cycle of the mystical cycle. And the new light of the revelation of the inner Torah of the Arizal, and then as it manifests through the Baal Shem Tov and Chassidus. And at the same time, the outer knowledge of technology and science, the Industrial Revolution, and the revolutions that followed, the computer and information, are all a result of a very intense darkness that had to give. So the Founding Fathers coming in that period, essentially, a little before that, the late 18th century, is all part of this process. But I want to go back to the internal Mitzrayim that I wanted, which I think is the key element for ourselves. How we enter Passover. As I said, the bizarre twist, beyond bizarre, that for our grandparents, Mitzrayim was getting out of the physical oppression of Shibud Malchus, of the oppression of the yoke of the nations. And in our case, that's not the issue. The issue is getting out of the oppression of our own internal psyches and the lives that we live and the freedoms we have, and you can really do anything. God forbid if there was a decree that Jews could not send their children to Jewish schools, you'd see how many would want to enroll them. Because we have the choice to do so, only 1 out of 10 Jewish children in New York get a Jewish education. It's a real statistic. What does that say? That when you have options and you're free, internally something gets eroded. Vayishman Yeshur and Vayivat, it says. That when you fatten yourself up, you begin to become callous. You start kicking. You become insensitive. So let's talk about bittul on the personal level. As I said, there's 2 ways that a person can come to it, and this is an option that we have before us. You can come through the way of the fool or the way of the wise. 2 children that sit at the Seder table. And as I said, Habchira b'yotchem, the choice is ours. So bittul is the heart, the cooperative word of Passover, and that's the secret word that, as I said, the key to everything. Why do we obsess? And I remember my grandmother and my mother, and now in my own home, the obsession of getting rid of every shred of chametz, every crumb of bread, or bread derivatives. And bread derivatives, trust me, is a big, long list, much more than just the word implies. And going under the couches and over the couches and every nook and cranny. I think this became the mother of spring cleaning in the spring Passover season. I don't know if you could check on that. And then, of course, the opposite extreme, that's chametz, that's Passover, the bread. And then the opposite extreme, you have matzah, of that necessity to eat matzah, whether you like it or not. Some people happen to like it. I don't know if it's actually a likable food, but as you'll see, bittul doesn't taste so good, actually, in the taste of it. So when you look at it on a ostensible level externally, it does seem somewhat odd. But if you think about it a little more mystically and a little more psychologically, it's not odd at all. Number one, details, as we know, do matter. Of all the worlds in which we live, if anything, technology teaches us that every detail matters. A dot in a computer program that may have billions of lines of code can make it work or not work. 1 dot. Someone can say, what's the big thing? A dot. 1 dot among millions of lines. 1 mutant cell, God forbid, in a human being that has 75 trillion cells. I just learned that recently. I didn't know it was trillion. I thought billion would be also pretty good. 75 trillion cells. And 1 mutant cell creates havoc that is of the worst type. Unspeakable, I don't even want to mention it. So if you think in terms of quantity, it doesn't make sense. But we don't live in a world of quantity. We live in a world of quality, where today we understand that the universe, and what makes it tick, is DNA, is cellular, subcellular structures, microscopic and submicroscopic particles, all things that no human being can experience with the 5 senses. So basically everything is shaped today by things that we cannot in any way measure with our sensory tools. but not only is it real, it is what shapes everything and defines everything. This too is a big extreme. You go back 200 years ago, this was not known. Even scientists, even the most brilliant, would tell you they understood there were some forces beneath the surface. But to the extent that we know today, it wasn't even fathomable. Today's the opposite. Today everyone will say, well, if we discover that, who knows what else is there? There can be layers and layers that we may, and we probably will never discover. So, just to put that to rest, the idea of details, mattering, is something that shapes everything in life today. You may not care, but the fact is, the medicines you take, whether it's in health, whether it's in technology, on every level possible, it shapes everything. The outer is shaped by the inner. Now, so therefore, when you think about it, then my grandmother being obsessed with a few crumbs is not that crazy, even though she may not have thought of it this way. So what is the meaning behind this matzah chometz duality? So let me do this with a little diagram, and you'll see it all comes down to a bittul thing. Pen, please. Okay. So chometz and matzah are both made up of 3 letters, which I am going to now proceed to draw. Okay? Just give me a second, and we'll have it done. Okay. First for the camera. Is it being seen?
Yes.
Oh, good. And now for the rest of us. Good? So, chametz and matzah. Chametz is the word used for bread on Pesach. All year round it's called lechem, but chametz. So, ches, right? 3 letters. Ches, mem, and tzadik. And matzah is mem, tzadik, and hey. Now, if you think about it, 3 letters, but 2 of the 3 letters are exactly the same. So we'll show you which ones. So the mem of chametz, right? And the mem of matzah, the same letter. So they cancel each other out. Okay? Mathematically speaking. The tzadik, right? Of the second letter of matzah and the third of chametz cancel each other out. So you're left with a ches and a hey. Diagram number 2. Okay, ches and a hey. We're going to focus on the ches and the hey. This is fun. The time I get even with all my teachers who used to do this. Now I force you to listen. No blackboard. Ches and a hey. How's that? Okay. So ches and a hey. Remember, those are the 2 left over. The mem and tzadik have significance, but they're the same exactly. So all the differences, if you look in a ches and a hey, is they both have 3 lines. Like a little house, you have a roof, a right leg. But the difference is the ches, the left leg, is extended and it connects to the roof top. Okay? In the hay, it doesn't extend. So, diagram number 3. Because they're almost the same. So the difference is this, and actually, well, I can't make a diagram. Bittul can be drawn. I've come to my point. This is it. Because the difference, let's just go back to the diagram. I'll draw it in a moment. How do I draw this space here exactly? That was my dilemma here. Because that's the only difference. This line extends. This line I can draw, but a hay is a space. And there's no way to draw space. Well, the only way to draw space is like this. This is the hay, the space. And this is the ches, the line. Understand, space has no space, basically. What does that mean? This isn't just a nice, cute thing. It happens to be extremely relevant. The space between the rooftop of the hay and the left leg and the line is the key to everything. When it's closed, it's self-contained. It doesn't have any spout, any release point. What happens when a kettle is boiling hot water and it doesn't have a spout? It will have to explode at some point or implode. That doesn't happen in the physical world, but psychologically the ches is so self-contained there's no spout. The spout is a spout of humility, a pause. There's a pause. The ches just arrogantly just continues down. In the hay there's a pause. Af asisiv. What's a pause? A pause is that when someone's speaking to you and they're sharing with you something on their minds, especially if it matters to them, instead of you blurting out an answer as soon as they finish speaking or even before they finish, there's a pause. What's that pause? The pause is a pause of respect. It's modesty, it's humility, it's respecting another person. Even if you completely disagree with them, it's ability for you to put yourself in their shoes. Maybe they have a point. And of course it gets more difficult if it's something you don't like. Or they're telling you something that you don't want to hear about you or about anything. So that pause is the secret to all of life. I just gave an example in communication. But let's put it this way. Let's say you're convinced of something and you think you're absolutely right. And you happen to be also a brilliant person, so you have all the great arguments for it. But your life isn't working. And then a friend wants to share something with you. What's the problem? They can't get through to you because you're a ches. You're a closed box without room to get in. The hay always has that door opening, that space, the door opening. The ches doesn't let anybody in. It's like a sealed box. The hay lets people in and lets you out. So what is our biggest trap in life? And many people will say, well, if I had more money, so it's money, poverty, or lack of money. Others would say friends. Others would say love. The list goes on, as we call it, the usual suspects. Round up the usual suspects. A whole list of them. Of course, you could always blame everybody else for your problems. That's an addition. That's always part of the usual suspects. But even these, like money, lack of opportunities, no mazel, that's a big one, no love. They all may be true, but they're all symptoms. You know what the greatest trap is? And that's what Passover tells us? Listen closely. It's you. You are your greatest trap. You and your damn ego. Emphasis on damn. And your damn chametz. You are your trap. You are your own worst enemy. Now, before anybody gets the wrong impression, this is not meant to feed in your own low self-esteem that you may have anyway, and trying to say, okay, there's another thing to... That's not my point. That's not at all my point. Because that's... The point, because as you'll see, when you say that you are the problem, that's not saying you're worthless. That's saying that you can do something about it. It's a big difference. As I've always discussed here, and this comes from Tanya, where he says, if you want to know the difference between a healthy feeling of sadness and an unhealthy one, what's the difference between depression, for example, and as he calls it, merirus and atzvus, depression and sadness. So you feel sad about your situation, and it was being depressed about your situation. What's the difference? Because one, he says, is demoralizing, and the other one is motivating. It's actually a very almost an easy formula. Anything that demoralizes you comes from klippa, comes from evil, because it doesn't do anything for you. It's just a feeder of demoralization. Makes you feel bad about yourself. So when people put guilt, they call this big thing Jewish guilt. As I've said many times, there is no real Hebrew word for guilt. So I don't know where this Jewish guilt thing comes from. It's another stereotype. I mean, there's things for remorse, there's tshuva, there's regret. All if it motivates you to do something. But usually, when someone makes you feel guilty, it's usually not about very motivating. So he basically, principle, if it demoralizes you and it breaks your spirit, which means it causes you to lock yourself up and not feel you feel disempowered, it's not coming from Yetzer Tov, it's coming from the evil part. That just is another way of it, of oppressing you. It's another chametz. Whereas if it's a feeling that motivates you, so let's say you have a boss, or you have a friend, or a mentor, or a teacher, or a rabbi, who believes in you, and you know they believe, and they say, I'm disappointed. I thought you would rise to the occasion. And you go away feeling perhaps down, but you feel motivated to do something about it. That's a true friend. Then, of course, there's a third category of people who don't tell you at all what they really think, and they don't tell you that you could have done better. They don't let you never grow. It's called constructive criticism. That you could hear from someone you trust, someone who cares about you. Those are the greatest friends in your life will be people who you can go to and say to them, kick me in the pants, I want you to. But not as lip service. A lot of people say that with like being macho and bravado and all that. They don't really mean it. The greatest friends are the people who can say it to you in a way that will help you grow, not help you undermine you. Then there are people who love to undermine. Or maybe they don't even love it, they just happen to do it. They may be just people who do it to themselves as well. So when they criticize you, it's not about getting you to grow and do something better. It's about knocking you. Some people just feel better when everybody's failing, because then you don't stand out as a failure. There's such a thing called, like, if everybody fails, it's not so bad, because it doesn't mean that I'm not a failure. There's that syndrome, and on and on. So when you talk about lashon hara and rechilus, bad mouthing and negative, what's the real bottom line? Is demoralizing, has no benefit. The joke goes by some, we're not talking lashon hara, we're talking about how we can help that person. If that's true, then that's one thing. Then it's not lashon hara. You care about someone and you're discussing how you can help that person in a real way. It's another story. But there's ways to tell, and I say, bottom line, the difference is when you hear someone says something about you critically, about your work or something you've done, if it's motivating and you feel challenged, and you feel, something, I want to do it better, then you're in the right direction. If it's demoralizing, and it's just about putting you down. And this also comes down to what kind of advice it is. Sometimes a person who gives constructive will also give you some direction. Will say, if you did it this way, try this, try that. The other person is just there to knock you. They're not going to give you any suggestions, alternatives, which is always a good way to test it. Say, okay, I didn't do it right. Can you tell me an alternative? And if they don't offer anything, then you have to wonder what their motivation was. So bittul. So to go back to the ches and the hey, the space, I can go and show you not only communication and how we deal with people. It's about that we are our own worst enemy, and Pesach challenges that. That's the way you enter Pesach. You clean for chametz. It's about cleaning your own internal chametz. The bread is just our victim, because you eat it and it's a part of our production. It represents the material world, the ego world. So ego per se is not unhealthy. That's why we eat bread all year round. If it was unhealthy, if it was the Yetzer Hara and it was all evil, it should be forbidden all year round. As I was just reading, one of the Kabbalists, the author of the Chodeidi, Shlomo Alkovitz, who was a Tzfat from the Tzfat mystics. He was a brother-in-law of Rav Moshe Korovero, the Ramak. He composed the Chodeidi that we sing on Friday night. So he has a commentary on the Haggadah, and he asked that question. He says, if the chametz represents the Yetzer Hara and the angel of death and everything evil, it should be forbidden all year round. And then he adds something which I found a little humorous. He says, if not all year round, at least Shabbos and Yom Tov, and the holy days. So the rest of the secular days, okay, let him have a little bread, but every Shabbos and Yom Tov, it's a sacred day. And he quotes the Zohar and answers, because the point here is not about destroying the ego. It's about channeling it. So once there was a time when it took control of you, and you have to redeem it, and you have to so be symbolic 7-8 days where we focus on recognizing its evils. But the goal afterwards is to channel it. As a matter of fact, 50 days later on Shavuos, we bring Shtei HaLechem, the only offering in the temple that's a double bread, Shtei HaLechem, 2 loaves of bread. Why 2? One for the Passover that we didn't do, and one for Shavuos. In other words, it's about channeling it. But all channeling always begins by first recognizing the potential evils that something can bring you to. So ego can be a very great motivation in life. As a matter of fact, even the Yetzer Hara, the Talmud says there would be no procreation if there was no Yetzer Hara. There's a whole story in the Talmud about that. So that doesn't mean there aren't negative elements coming out of it. It's about channeling. So Passover, we focus on, in a very blunt and a very brutal way, on what is the heart of the problem. The heart of the problem is chametz. Chametz rises. The yeast, it rises, inflated ego. I don't know what percent, but it's good 67% of bread is air. 67% of an ego is also air. It means it's just a lot of fluff, a lot of bluster, with little substance. Matzah is down to the substance itself. Flour on water, 18 minutes, not allowed anything, no extras. Nothing else is mixed into it. It doesn't allow to rise. There's no air. That's it. As much as we humans can accomplish. This is an interesting exercise. It's like a real symbolism. If you think of it in our case, it's taking down the basic elements of water and flour to just the amount that you need. Not one extra fluff. Not one extra exaggeration. No inflation. Zero inflation. Which they say has also its recession problems. That's why we only do it for 8 days, because it can create create high interest, zero inflation. I don't know, some type of other counter-economic, centrifugal force or whatever, centrifugal. So in personal terms, what this means is to focus on bittul means to have a day or night, first night of Passover, and really 7-8 days. 8 days, I say 7 because in Israel it's 7-8 days here, where we focus on this. Focus on yourself. And everybody can do this for a short period of time and see where your ego comes into play. It's about suspending ourselves. That's the key, the bittul. Matzah teaches us to suspend ourselves and suspend our perspectives. You sit at a Seder table, so the Seder is structured around children. I'll talk about those that obviously don't have children or we're not going to be with children. But on the way the Seder is meant to be, what is it about children that makes the Seder so special? So of course there's the beauty, the warmth, the family, and of course we tell them the story, but it's deeper than that. Children are almost a natural elicitor of humility. When you're sitting with children, you're not sitting with people your own age, where you're competing with them, showing off, or negotiating. It's not business dealings. With children, it's a moment of reality, because children are not impressed with your bank account. And they're not impressed with your so-called plaques. Ask your child next time how much they really care. Unless they're contaminated, then that becomes something they're now worshipping as well. Hopefully that's not the case. Children are children. Simple. You sit with children and you really engage them, and not just to be yetzer, not just, okay, you sit at the table, throw them some gifts, you ask some questions, let them ask the question, oh, how cute, the little Moshe asks the questions, give them a toy, this, and then after came in and promise a gift. I'm talking about if you really engage your children and you step down from your pedestal and say, what does my child really think? Here's a night that you have an opportunity to do so, more than any other night of the year. Even though Shabbos you could also do, but Pesach is made for that. You prepare for that. Children come home from school, they have a certain enthusiasm. What is it? It's more for us than for the children, frankly. More for our inner child than for them. Because it's for us an act, as the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid have an unbelievable few analogies of the beautiful moment when a parent or an adult bends down to lift up a young child that's still crawling. The beauty, the emes of that moment. Why is it so emes? Because it has nothing to do with all the great achievements in life. You're not going to get an award for it. It's not very glamorous. It's not dramatic. It's a person bending down to pick up a child who's on the floor, to kiss the child, to hug the child. What's in that? What's so beautiful and special about that? When you see a newborn child's face, and you're just enamored with its beauty, or you touch its softness, what is it that we're touching? So Chassidus says you're touching the essence of existence that has not yet been jaded by the ornaments and by the props and by all the stuff that we become so enamored with and so seduced by in our lives. It's purity. The etzem, the essence of a small child, of a simple person, touches the essence of God. God too is unornamental. There's the famous verse where Eliyahu Navi, the prophet who comes on Passover Seder, he's looking for God. So first he hears the thunder. That must be God entering. No. Then he sees the lightning. That must be God. Then he, what comes next? The Rash, the thunder. I said the thunder, lightning, the great sounds, and he thinks that's God. And no. Then comes in Koel Dmamodaka, the silent, the gentle, delicate voice. And then he knew he was in God's presence. So God sends first thunder, and then lightning, and then voices, and this. I mean, the Havdil, it's a little like that Wizard of Oz scene, where he's puffing and huffing and puffing with this, and then the little door goes and pulls the curtain open. And this old Shmendrik from Kansas, this charlatan, whatever. Havdil, Elef Havdalas, I hope God understands I was just using it as a contemporary analogy. But the idea is that or even in the great film 2001. So what's the end story? What's reality? The face of a child. That's what it comes down to. It's all its abstractions. So with all this, what the Passover does allows us, and this comes down to bittul. Now, for a healthy parent, it doesn't take a lot of effort to bend down to pick up their child or to give them some attention. But we live in an unhealthy world, and the fact is that we sometimes don't find the time to do so, and we forget. So we replace it with giving gifts to our children, with buying them video machines, taking them on trips, and keeping them busy to feel like they're happy. But trust me, children want much more your attention than all your gifts. That doesn't mean you shouldn't give them. You know that I got this in an email, I don't know, true story, not true story, about that child that calls his father, a high-powered executive, and asks him how much he makes an hour. You know, odd question coming from a child to his parent. His father doesn't have time for him, sends him through the 4 secretaries and so on, and he keeps calling back. He wants to know. His father says, crazy question, stop bothering me, I'll come home, we'll talk about it. Finally, he comes home. Of course, when the father comes home, he has to read some newspapers. Then he has other things to do, and then there's, of course, email and internet and blackberries and blueberries and all the other. You have to be in touch with what's going on. And here, this child keeps badgering his father. What do you want? He says, I want to know how much you make an hour. Finally, the father gives him some figure. You know, I guess he calculated. He probably counts it all day. So he knows, let's say, whatever, $5,000 an hour, $10,000 an hour. Sheldon Adelson is making $1 million an hour. So, you know, there's numbers if you're working toward a goal, Gary. You know, you break it down to how many hours do we have left in our lives, you know, etc., etc. So the next day, the father finds on his desk, he finds an envelope with something like $32.28. with a note from his son that says, how much can I buy of your time with this? That's why I wanted to know. Enough said. So even as parents who should have the natural inclination to know what matters, the fact is it's not so simple, which of course just tells you how crazy the world is. And this is not exception. This happens to be the rule today. Parents are too busy. And you ask them, why are you so busy? I'm busy making a living. Why are you making a living? So my children should be secure. But your child wants to have you. So what is, you know, I think the rest is understood. This is an ego trip that we are addicted to, that has nothing to do with Pesach, and has nothing to do with growth, and has all to do with the traps that we get caught in. This doesn't mean making money and work is a curse. It means it can be a curse if you don't take control over it. And if Pesach doesn't help you look at that, then I don't know what it does. This is what Pesach is for. It's come to tell you to look at yourself, your own chametz, your own ego. Not here to make you feel good about yourself. And if you're a real adult and you're truly honest with yourself, look at it in the mirror. It also is not here to demoralize us. Remember that. It's not about breaking us. It's about truth. And that's why the Passover Seder is so structured around family and children. Because then you're with reality. Many people are comfortable to be with their children. You know that. Because they spend so little time with them, they don't know what to do when they are with them. That's why we have to find all kinds of ways to. You take them to, what do you want to do? You tell your child. It's a common thing. You want to go to a park. Why don't you decide what you want to do? You know, maybe you should just sit with your child and have a little conversation on the child's terms. It's not so easy because it's awkward, uncomfortable, and then of course you say the child doesn't want to talk to me. Yeah, at this point probably not, but this is exactly the idea. And I'm saying all of this simply to put things into some type of stark contrast. Do you think this was the problem our great-grandparents had? Trust me, this was not their problem. Because that's what they lived for all day. That's what they came home to. They weren't consumed with being wood choppers and water carriers, because it wasn't very glamorous. You didn't get many plaques, and it didn't feed your ego to be a good water carrier. That's not, you got your compliments were what your children were doing, and what kind of home you had. That was what was valuable. So we live in the opposite. Everything's turned inside out today. The challenge is just different. But just as our grandparents were so-called rewarded that their grandchildren did come into a free world, our job is to turn the inner world free, which our grandparents did not even imagine would be the issue. And that's what I think is the key thing to focus on. Now, as I said, there are 15 steps of the Seder, and there's a Seder plate. There's a lot to talk about. I'm sure you all have, or you will have, all kinds of interesting things to share at your Passover table. But above all, it's the real experiences. to truly experience a moment of reality with children, or whatever it is who you sit with. Now, for those of us that will not be sitting with children for whatever reason, this doesn't mean we're not able to have this experience. It just simply means that we have to access it some other way. It could be through your own truth. Remember, we still have the inner child, it's still there. We will have, hopefully you sit with other people, you can also create bonds and connections that are transcend the superficial stuff of life. So it's not that this can't be done. I just was speaking about it in the way that it could be done, so-called in the fullest sense of the word, or it could be done in different ways of different manifestations. There's a lot of pain in this world, and I find that when you have opportunities like a Seder table, which is a gift, to not use it for helping relieve some of that pain and relieve some of that general relief through transcendence, then it's a wasted opportunity. So I want to say is that as we're entering Pesach this next few days, really take seriously. This is a real window of opportunity, a window and a door and a chimney, and more. And that our objective is to access it, and the access it is through bittul. It's the secret to everything. The ability to listen, the ability to, which is magid, you tell the story, but it's also back and forth, a dialogue, a discussion. I must tell you, even though you see me doing a lot of speaking, and I sit here and I speak more than all of you do, in this room, in this class, but I will tell you that I look much more forward to listening than to speaking. How do you like that? And I see speaking really as listening. I would not sit here and speak to you if I did not spend many years listening. I say this very honestly. And even when I sit here, I really feel that my maybe a gift is that I'm able to listen to people and give them back something maybe in different words. It's like picking up the vibes and being able to express it. Everyone has their gifts and their opportunities. So I really believe speaking is listening. It's about the human condition. I'm not here to share with you my chachmas, my wisdom, or my innovations and chidushim. It's really to share together. We're all here in one existential lonely world. And we either will feed that loneliness or we will somewhat relieve ourselves of it. And we do it through being together. You join together, you drink a cup called loneliness. It's better than drinking alone. This is long before Billy Joel. This was sung at Seder tables for many years in different words. Helach ma'anya, or other terms. Is he Jewish, by the way?
Yeah.
Okay, so there you go.
I think one of his
All goes back
parents
to
is a
this.
Holocaust survivor.
Okay, even better. And it's about understanding that we can, when our spirits come together, as they say, it's two nefesh elikis and one nefesh habamis, two divine souls against one animal soul. So it's like two matzahs against one chometz, that type of thing. Two it's good inclinations against one bad one. That's what the Mittler Rebbe says. And the question is asked, why is that the case? When two people come together, it should be two Yetzer against two Yetzer Tovs. Because I have my animal soul, you have your animal soul. We come together, my divine soul and your divine soul, my animal soul, your animal soul. And the answer is an unbelievable answer that I once heard. There's an expression in the Torah, Ein Adam Chayte V'loi Loi. A person is not interested in sinning for somebody else. They sin for themselves. You sin for your benefit. People don't go make a sin so someone else can benefit. Because the whole point of a sin is you'll do it because at least you feel you're getting something out of it. Or you don't even realize it's a sin, but it's only because there's something you gain. You're not going to go do something, a crime, so someone else should gain and you gain nothing. Why would you do that? Maybe there are some psychopaths like that, but I mean, so the explanation is given that when two people come together, the Yetzer Haras don't have anything to join. They're not interested in making a partnership. Because what does my Yetzer Hara have from yours? I only want what I gain. I don't care what you gain. Whereas two divine souls have mutual interest because they want to change the world. They want to bring God into the picture. It's not about them. So they're ready to join. So when we meet, two people meet, and with good intentions. Of course, you could say there are partners in crime, and you see it all the time. There's mutual benefit. It's another discussion. We're not going to go into all the halachic details of this matter. But one thing is for sure, that when people come together with good intentions, there's a certain synergy, more than the sum of the parts. Two flames join, they become like one. Two wicks never become one. That's what it comes down to. Things of the ego, things of the material world do not join as one. Two flames become one. Two drops of water become one. You can't distinguish between them. And synergy is also exponential growth, which means, as the Talmud puts it, that, as the Talmud says, that when two people lift up something, they can lift up more than the sum of the parts. What does that mean? If I lift 100 pounds, and you can lift 100 pounds, together we can lift more than 200 pounds. We can lift something like 220. And if it's three people, it grows continuously exponentially. It's a Talmud, it's a whole calculation there of the Meraglim, the scouts, when they carry those large overgrown fruits back from Israel to the wilderness. And the meaning of it is essentially the essence of synergy. There's some invisible force that happens when two people join together in a good deed. Whether it's a brainstorm session or whether it's just volunteerism or just sitting at a Seder table. There's something that adds, that's something. Where does that extra thing come? It's something because souls are really one. So when we come together, it's not just, like I said, 200 pounds is 220 or 360. Obviously, when you're talking spiritually, it's even more than that. So that's how I see our sitting here together. And week after week, for me, this is a very, always extremely moving to me to be here with you, because what I learn from you is more than what you learn from me. I can tell you that. And I think that it's a model for us sitting at the Seder as well. So though some of us here will not be sitting at the Seder probably together, though if some of you need a place, if you call me or you want to ask me, I maybe can arrange something. But even if we don't, please keep my spirit there if you like, and I'll keep yours with me. And above all, on a physical level, wherever it is that you will be the Seder, bring something to the table. If you're a host, obviously you can set the tone. Even if you're a guest, and you can probably do some things, a little trouble to get things going, make it a little more meaningful. Obviously, there are certain places that are so locked that it's hard to really do anything. Then I would just say, Rahman send you to be there. Get out as soon as you can. Hopefully that's not the case. But you could always find. I've been at tables where I was like a minority, and I always found someone that I was able to join up with, and we both started thinking a little like, you ask like the stupid question. It sounds like a stupid sounding question, and then people start saying, hey, you ask a few of them. You just like challenge people who are like too conformists or something like that. There are ways to do it. If you need some tricks of the trade, I can give you some tips of how to. But no matter where you are, you can definitely you're there for a reason, and I'm sure you'll meet somebody if you open yourself up to it that will be ready to open themselves up as well. And may our flames join together with a little bittel, a little wine, and more dipped in Acharei. You will have a true freeing experience, and Hashem should bless us all that it should be a Passover that opens up true doors. What I mean by that, lasting doors that will remain open even after Pesach ends. Amen. And we will not be. There will be no class next Wednesday, at least not physical sense of it. Even though technically we could have one because it's Chol HaMoed, but I'm looking for vacation. It's just not so practical at this point. And stay tuned. There will be some big news coming that will compensate for that too. And can I say, everyone have a very happy Pesach and Chag Sameach. Again, if anybody needs any assistance in any Passover fashion, you can speak to me, Velvel outside there if you like, and I'll be happy to help any way I can. And besides that, I want to also say, if those of you that do not get the weekly emails I send out, be happy to send them to you if you just give me your email address. And this, even though this sounds a little like a plugging thing, but the truth is on meaningfullife.com there's really a lot of resource material, both as far as the steps of the Seder go, the Seder plate, the 4 questions, all basically psycho-spiritual applications that you can definitely use, and feel free to access. It's all available to you, free, and so on. And again, if anything else I can do, please. So again, every Chag, Pesach, Choshev, Sameach, and I shall see you. We will announce exactly where the class will be in 2 weeks from now. This week we did it here, and we shall see as things evolve. Again, it's a pleasure to always sit with you, and have a good Yom Tov. Thank you very much.
Maybe I give some like 2 or 3 weeks.